The morning they called me, I was standing in the cereal aisle at Loblaws, holding 2 boxes, and trying to decide which one Marcus would actually eat. That was the thing about being married to someone for 4 years. You spent a shocking amount of mental energy on small decisions that felt important. Honey Nut Cheerios, or the granola he'd been saying he wanted to try. I put the granola in the cart. I remember that detail clearly because I never got to give it to him. My phone rang at 9:47 inches the morning. It was a number I didn't recognize, a 416 area code, and I almost let it go to voicemail. I'm glad I didn't. The woman on the other end identified herself as a nurse at St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto. She asked me if I was the wife of Marcus Bellamy. I said yes. She told me there had been an accident on the DVP, a serious collision near the Bloor Street exit during the morning commute. She said Marcus had been brought in by ambulance. She said the words critical condition, and I remember the granola box slipping from my hand and landing on the floor, and I just left it there and walked out of the store. I was 31 years old, and 7 months pregnant. I drove to St. Michael's with my hazard lights on the whole way, though I couldn't tell you why. Some part of my brain was trying to signal to the world that something was wrong, that whoever was on the road around me needed to understand that I was not a normal driver on a normal Tuesday morning. I kept both hands on the wheel, and I did not cry. I told myself I would not cry until I knew something. They brought me into a small consultation room off the ER, and a doctor sat across from me and explained what had happened in careful, measured language that I had to ask him to repeat twice. Marcus had been rear-ended at highway speed by a transport truck. The impact was catastrophic. He had suffered a traumatic brain injury. They had him in emergency surgery. The next 24 hours would tell them more. But he wanted me to understand that the injury was severe. I asked if Marcus was going to die. He said they were doing everything they could. I sat in that room alone for a long time after he left. Then I felt something that stopped me completely. A sensation I can only describe as pressure, low and insistent, that had nothing to do with grief. I was 30 weeks pregnant. My body, regardless of what my mind was going through, had its own emergency to announce. They admitted me to obstetrics that same afternoon. The doctors told me that the stress had triggered early contractions. They said the baby was coming, whether we were ready or not. Our daughter was born at 11:58 that night, 10 weeks early, 2 floors above where her father was still in surgery. She weighed 2 pounds, 14 ounces. They put her directly into the NICU, and I didn't get to hold her. I got to see her through glass. This tiny person hooked to tubes and monitors, her chest rising and falling, with help she shouldn't have needed for another 2.5 months. The neonatologist told me she was a fighter. I told him she had no choice. Marcus came out of surgery in the early hours of the next morning. He was alive. But the surgeon told me the brain injury had caused significant damage, and that Marcus was in a coma, and that they did not yet know what he would be like if he woke up. When he said if, he looked at the floor. I called my parents from a chair in the NICU waiting room at around 3 inches the morning. My mother answered on the second ring, which told me she hadn't been sleeping either. I told her everything. Marcus. The surgery. The coma. The baby. 2 floors up, 2 months too soon. I heard my mother make a sound I had never heard her make before. Then she put me on speaker so my father could hear, and I told it all again. They said they were coming. They said they'd be there as soon as they could get a flight from Vancouver. I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized I was holding. I needed them. I needed someone who loved me to sit beside me in that terrible building and help me figure out what to do next. I fell asleep in the chair. When I woke up, there, stiff in inches the morning, there were 2 voicemails on my phone. The first one was from my father, left at 6:14 inches the morning. He said they had looked at flights and that they were expensive last minute, but that wasn't the thing he wanted to talk about. He said that they were supposed to leave in 4 days for a trip to Newfoundland, a 10-day coastal tour they had been planning for almost a year, a trip for their 40th wedding anniversary. He said they had deposits paid on a guided tour company out of St. John's, a whale-watching excursion, 2 nights at a heritage inn in Trinity Bay. He said they stood to lose close to $4,000 if they canceled now. He said he and my mother needed to talk about it and that he would call me back. I listened to that voicemail 3 times. I kept waiting for it to become something different. The second voicemail was from my sister. She is 4 years older than me and has always been the one who made the practical arguments in our family. She called to say that she had already looked into it and that the tour company had a no-refund policy within 2 weeks of departure. She said she understood this was a terrible situation. She said she hoped Marcus pulled through. She said that she had her own life, her own family, her own obligations, and that she couldn't just pick up and fly across the country on 0 notice. She said she was sorry. She did not ask about the baby. She did not ask her name. I had named her Clara, after Marcus's grandmother. I sat with that phone in my hand for a long time. The financial reality of the next few weeks arrived quickly, and it arrived hard. The NICU care for a premature infant in Ontario is covered under OHIP for the medical procedures, but the extended equipment, the private monitoring, the specialist consultations there were costs that piled up faster than I could track. Marcus's long-term care situation was uncertain, and his short-term costs were significant. I was on maternity leave from my job as an elementary school teacher, which meant I was on EI, which is not designed for a situation like mine. I had some savings. Marcus had some savings. Combined, we had maybe $19,000 in a joint account that was supposed to be our house down payment. I called my parents and asked if they could help. Not give loan. I was specific about that. I told them I would pay back every dollar. I had a pension, a permanent contract with the school board. I wasn't going anywhere. I asked for $15,000. I told them what it was for. I told them my daughter was in the NICU, and my husband was in a coma, and I was alone in a city 4,000 kilometers from the people who were supposed to be my family. My father said the timing was very difficult. My mother said they would think about it. 4 days later, they boarded their flight to St. John's. I found out from my sister, who sent me a text that said only, "They left this morning. I'm sorry. I don't know what to say." I didn't respond. I didn't know what to say either. I want to tell you what those weeks looked like, because I think it matters. I want you to understand the texture of it, not just the facts. I would wake up every morning at 5:30 inches a hospital room. They had given me a family room on the NICU floor because of my situation, and I would go sit beside Clara's isolette and talk to her. I talked to her about Marcus, about what he was like, about the apartment we'd been saving for in the East End, about the name we'd picked out if she was a girl. I told her about his laugh. I told her he had a very specific and unreasonable hatred of geese, which she would understand when she was older and encountered the ones in High Park. I talked because the nurses said it helped, and because it was the only thing I could do. In the afternoons I would take the elevator down 2 floors and sit with Marcus. I would hold his hand and watch the monitors and talk to him too. Different conversations. I told him Clara was fighting. I told him she had his ears. I told him I needed him to come back. At night, I called the insurance company, the bank, the school board, Service Canada, anyone I thought might have a resource I hadn't found yet. I applied for the Registered Disability Savings Plan for Clara. I looked into the Ontario Works Bridge funding. I made lists. Making lists felt like doing something. My parents called from Newfoundland twice. The first time my mother said the whales had been spectacular. She said she wished I could see it. I held the phone against my shoulder and looked at my daughter's chest rising and falling inside her isolette, and I said I was glad they were having a good time. The second time, my father told me they had decided they would help when they got back. He said not 15,000, but maybe 5 or 6. He said they had their own retirement to think about. He said they would see me in a few days. Marcus died on the 8th day. A secondary bleed, the doctors said. Something that had been building since the surgery, quiet and unseen, and then suddenly it wasn't. They came to get me from the NICU at 2 inches the morning. I held his hand for a little while after. I don't know how long. Clara did not know her father had died. She was focused on the serious work of breathing. My parents flew home and drove directly from YVR to their house in North Vancouver. My father called that night and said they were exhausted from the trip and would come see me next week. I said Marcus was dead. There was a very long silence. My mother started crying. My father said he was so sorry. He said of course they would come. He said they'd get a flight first thing in the morning. They came. They were there for 5 days. My mother held Clara through the glass in the NICU on the 3rd day, which was the first time any family member had held her, and I watched my mother's face do something complicated that I didn't have the energy to interpret. My father offered to help with the funeral arrangements, and I let him, because I couldn't do it alone, and my sister had come for 2 days, and then gone back to her life in Calgary. After they left, I was alone again. The financial help they had promised, the $5,000 or $6,000, came as a check for $3,500, mailed 3 weeks later, with a note from my mother saying they hoped it helped and that they were thinking of us. I deposited it. I didn't call to say thank you. I didn't call for a long time after that. Clara came home when she was 4 months old, fat and ferocious, and completely unaware that she had spent the first third of her life in a hospital. She weighed 8 pounds by then. She had Marcus's ears exactly. I carried her into our apartment, which still had his jacket on the hook by the door, and I sat down on the floor with her in my arms, and I did not move for a very long time. Over the following year, I rebuilt things slowly. The school board had been generous with my leave. A colleague had organized a meal train that kept food in my fridge for 3 months. Marcus's parents, who lived in Hamilton, drove up every second weekend without being asked and took Clara so I could sleep. They never made me feel like a burden. They never made me feel like I owed them anything. They just came. My own parents called on Clara's first birthday and on holidays. My sister sent gifts. We had the shape of a family, if not the substance of one. I was cordial when they reached out, and quiet when they didn't. And I never said out loud what I had decided, which was that I no longer trusted them with the parts of me that were real. This went on for several years. Clara started kindergarten at the school where I taught, which was convenient in the way that many things in a single mother's life are organized around convenience. She was fearless and loud, and deeply interested in bugs, which she came to naturally. Marcus had been an environmental scientist. I raised her to know who her father was. I kept photographs of him at her eye level. I read her the emails he had sent me when we were dating, edited for content. She knew his laugh from videos on my phone. She said my dad with easy authority, the way children do when something belongs to them, regardless of whether it is present. I thought the chapter with my parents was simply closed. I had not consciously decided to cut them off. I had just stopped reaching toward them, and at some point the distance became its own kind of answer. Then my father had a stroke. He survived, but it changed things quickly. My mother called to tell me, and I flew out to Vancouver, because I was not the kind of person who could receive that news and do nothing. I stayed for 10 days. I helped organize the transition to the rehabilitation facility in Burnaby. I talked to the care team. I made spreadsheets of his medications and his follow-up appointments. My mother was overwhelmed, and I was the person who knew how to manage overwhelming things. My sister came for a long weekend. She and I worked in the same room without talking much about anything real. We had gotten good at that. My father recovered to a significant degree. He was slower, and his left hand never fully came back, but he was lucid and present, and he and I had some conversations during those 10 days that we had never had before. He told me he knew they had failed me. He used that word, failed. He did not offer a satisfying explanation for why. He said they had panicked, that they hadn't been able to face what was happening, that it had been cowardly. He said he was sorry. I told him, I heard him. I didn't tell him it was enough. I don't know if it was. I went back to Toronto. We talked more regularly after that. Something had shifted, or maybe I had just gotten old enough to hold two things at once: the love I had for them and the knowledge of what they were capable of. We were not close, but we were in contact. 2 years after the stroke, my father died. Heart failure, quietly, at home, with my mother beside him. My sister called me. I booked a flight the same afternoon. The funeral was in North Vancouver, at a church my parents had attended for 40 years, and the reception afterward was in their house, which I had not been in since I was a child. Clara came with me. She was 9 by then, solemn and observant, and she understood that this was a serious occasion without having to be told. She held my hand through the service. My mother seemed to have aged a decade in the 2 years since I'd seen her. She held Clara for a long time when we arrived, and she called her my girl in a way that made something tighten in my chest, because Clara did not really know her grandmother, and that was not Clara's fault, and it was not entirely my fault either. My sister and I handled the logistics together, efficiently, without conflict. We were good at the practical things. 3 weeks after the funeral, I got a call from my mother's lawyer. I was asked to come in for the reading of the will, or rather, I was asked if I would like to participate by video call, which I agreed to. My sister was there in person. My mother sat to the side. My father's estate, combined with their joint assets and the equity in the North Vancouver house, came to just over $890,000. The will divided it as follows: 60% to my sister, 40% to a discretionary fund to support my mother's ongoing care, with the remainder after my mother's death to go to my sister as well. I was not mentioned. My sister looked at the camera at me, and her expression was careful and unreadable. The lawyer explained that the will had been revised 3 years prior, after my father's stroke, and reflected my father's wishes as he had expressed them at that time. He said there was a letter, which he then read. My father's voice, or something that approximated it, said that he recognized I had built an independent life, and that he was proud of me, and that he believed I did not need what they had to give. He said he had always known I was the stronger one. He said he hoped I would understand. I sat with my laptop in my kitchen in Toronto and listened to my dead father explain that my competence was the reason he had written me out of everything. And I thought about the granola box on the floor at Loblaws, and the nurse on the phone, and the chair in the NICU where I had slept sitting up for 3 weeks, and the check for $3,500, and the whales off the coast of Newfoundland. After the call ended, my sister phoned me directly. She said she hadn't known. She said she was sorry. She said she thought it was wrong. I told her I believed her. Then she said something I hadn't expected. She said Dad had told her, before he died, that he had tried to protect the estate from being split too many ways, and that he had assumed had told himself that I was set up well enough. She said she thought I should know the reasoning, even if the reasoning was terrible. I thanked her for telling me. I hung up, and I sat for a long time. Here is what I keep thinking about. When Clara was in the NICU, weighing less than 3 pounds, I called my parents and I asked them to help me. Not to save me, not to fix it, just to help. They chose a trip, a vacation they had been planning. Yes, but a vacation. They lost some deposits. They saw whales. And when my father had years afterward to reckon with that choice, what he did with those years was revise his will to make sure I wouldn't receive anything when he was gone. He called it believing in my independence. I think it was easier than admitting he owed me something. My sister has suggested we consult a lawyer about whether the will can be challenged. In British Columbia, there are provisions under the Wills, Estates, and Succession Act for adult children who can demonstrate that a parent failed in their moral duty to provide for them. It is not a guaranteed claim. It is complicated, and it is expensive, and it will take time, and it will require me to lay out, in legal documents, the entire history of what my family did and did not do. It will mean my mother, who is elderly and unwell, will likely find out I am contesting. It will mean doing publicly and formally what I have only ever done privately and quietly. I don't know yet if I'm going to do it. What I do know is that Clara is 9 years old and wants to be a marine biologist, and that her father would have had a lot of feelings about that, most of them enthusiastic. I know that I have built something real in the years since I sat on the floor of our apartment and couldn't move, and that I built it without them. I know that my sister, who was also a product of that family and that cowardice, looked at the camera when the will was read, and her face said she was sorry, in a way I actually believed. And I know that whatever I decide about the will, I am not doing it for the money. I am doing it because my daughter deserves to know that the people who should have showed up for her, before she was even born, before she weighed 3 pounds in a hospital isolette in the middle of the night. I am doing it because someone should have to say, in a room with a judge, that what they did had a cost, that the trip was not worth it, that you cannot write someone out of your will and call it faith in them. That I tried, and I kept trying, and I am still here. Clara asked me last week why I seemed sad. I told her I was thinking about her grandfather, and that it was complicated. She thought about this, and then she said, very seriously, that complicated things usually meant there were a lot of feelings happening at the same time. I told her that was exactly right. She said her teacher had told her that was okay. I told her I agreed with her teacher. She went back to her book. She's reading about the ocean. She is so much like him. I am still deciding what to do. But I don't think I should stay quiet anymore. I think the people who loved me, and I do believe, in whatever broken way, that my parents loved me, should have to reckon with what love looks like when it's actually asked to show up. I think that matters. I think it has to matter. So I'm asking you, what would you do?